I think hello everyone, my warm greetings, and then thank you for showing interest in joining us today. My greeting is from the World Agroforestry Center, ICRAF in Nairobi. I am Ermias Bitamariam. I'm going to moderate this session, and I'll try to tell you what this session contains in short, and then the agenda for this session, and then we will continue from thereafter. So in this session, I think, before I start the actual session, I would like to also thank GLF for organizing this very timely and then interesting session, and then also giving us a chance to present our 5 to 10 years of research by several CGIAR research programs under the Water, Land and Ecosystem Program. And then we would be very happy to share, some of, a few of the experiences, the tools, the methods, and then we really came up with. So in this session today, we will going to have, a presentation on the overall achievement that we have done so far on restoration of degraded landscape, which was a flagship program under the Water, Land and Ecosystem. And then we are going to have like 3, specific case studies from 3 countries, one from Niger, another one from Mali, and then Ethiopia. So these are actually, practices on the ground, and then we will try to have a look at them. And then we are trying to also see, synergies and trade-offs between restoration and other development outcomes, because oftentimes when we want to target one outcome, it would have, another positive or negative impact on the other in another outcome. So I think optimizing or, maximizing synergies and then reducing trade-offs on this kind of investment are also very critical. So we are going to have also a presentation on that. And then also, restoration is always about, land or landscape. It is, it should be, human and people-centered. And then we have like 10 golden rules for socially equitable restoration. That's also a presentation where we are trying to see how, society is really seen in the restoration agendas. Then once we have these presentations, we are going to have interesting panel discussion. And then we selected 3 questions from the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. It is going to be launched this year. Between this year and then 2030, there will be a big initiative on restoration of degraded landscapes or ecosystem. So in that case, I really identified 6 basic barriers to ecosystem restoration. And then in this session, we will try to bring 3 of them, and then 3 panelists are going to really address them, not what, but how we are going to really overcome some of the key barriers for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So the general framework of this session is really to take up lessons learned in the past, and then we have also very interesting initiatives, particularly the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and then we would like to really see what lessons we need to take so that we will try to minimize risk, and then we would like to really be on the positive side when we are really targeting restoration outcomes by that. So I think with this basic background, I think I would love really if all the participants stay with us, tune with us, and then we will have very interesting questions and then answers and then discussions, and then just following the panel discussion at the end. And then I hope you are going to stay with us throughout. And then with that, I would love to also, invite the WLE, Water Land Ecosystem Director, Stefan, to give, a welcoming address. Then we will go directly to the presentation. Thank you very much, and then stay with us. Stefan, would you unmute yourself and then, give us your welcoming address to this session? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amirs. I hope you can hear me. I just had a power cut. So I missed the last 2-3 minutes, but I hope I'm back online. Colleagues, it's a real pleasure to welcome you this morning or afternoon, wherever you are in this world, or evening. My name is Stefan Ullenbrock. I'm leading the CGIAR research program on water, land, and ecosystem. Is one of the 5 flagship programs of WLE, and the researchers working, or some of the researchers working in this flagship program, organized the session today, which looks really interesting and exciting, as Amirs just presented the agenda. What do we do at WLE, at Water, Land and Ecosystem, in the field of restoration of degraded landscapes? First point I would like to make is that science-based evidences have clearly demonstrated that there is enormous potential for land restoration with multiple benefits in quite a number of areas. So the benefits of landscape restoration include food and nutrition security, water security, energy security, if you think about bioenergy, for instance, but also ecosystem health and ecosystem services, biodiversity conservation, etc. But we should also not forget about the critical role of the restoration of landscapes to support climate change mitigation, turning soils into carbon sinks through carbon sequestration, for instance, or in the field of climate change adaptation. Restoration of degraded landscapes can really play a critical role. However, we also have learned over the last decades that equitable restoration of outcomes requires more than only technology and biophysical sciences. I'm very much looking forward to the 10, what did Mia say, the 10 lessons learned, which we will hear later today. It's going beyond the technical approaches, and we need to understand and to address gender equality, land tenure, but also integrate local knowledge and consider the socio-historical and the socio-political context in the areas where we're working. Without understanding, without addressing that, very likely the planning as well as the implementation of measures will not be very successful. And this is also critical for evaluating the restoration efforts. WLE, or researchers of WLE, have developed quite a number of tools and methods over the last years that help us with monitoring restoration progress, help us with supporting decision-making and landscape restoration, which is complex because it needs quite a number of different stakeholders in a co-design process and to support decisions. Methods and tools were also to develop to enhance ecosystem services, to quantify synergies and trade-offs. Today, we will hear for a couple of these examples later in the session. And with this, we also hope to, with this research, we also hope to make an impact on the upcoming decade, UN decade on ecosystem restoration, as well as several SDGs. Colleagues and friends, I'm very much looking forward to the presentations and to the discussion later on, and I hand over back to Amias. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. And then we will continue with the presentation from now. And then, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Marcela Quintero. I'm the Research Director for Multifunctional Landscapes at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. And I'm happy today to present this together with my colleague, Ermias Betemerian, that works for the ICRAS and C4. Both of us has been involved in the CGIAR program on water, land, and ecosystems over the past years. And we have been collaborating under the flagship on restoring degraded lands. So today we would like to share some of the lessons that we get from the work that we have together with our partners conducted on this program. So first of all, I would like to say that we want to share 6 main lessons, and that I think they're key for the work ahead and the challenges ahead that we have in restoration in Africa. So the first lesson is about the power of information to catalyze restoration actions in Africa. So WLE and its partners and funders have made a tremendous investment in developing, consolidating, and sharing soil information. So this information is not a bottleneck anymore for the design of sound and context-appropriate restoration actions. Why soils information? I mean, restoration is beyond trees. And for long-lasting restoration efforts, we need to sustain those on healthy soils. So in WLE, we made available information tools for restoration practitioners. So for example, we have made available the Global Soil Data Manager for Sub-Saharan Africa, and with hundreds of users already registered there. Also, we supported the Africa Soil Information System project that includes a soil health surveillance system. Currently, we have approximately 17 countries using the soil infrared spectrum technology that is part of this soil health surveillance system. The second lesson or message that we want to communicate today is about the importance of scientific evidence for supporting investment cases in soil health restoration. And again, why soil health restoration? About 65% of the agricultural land in sub-Saharan Africa is degraded due to the poor management practices, which induce declines in soil biological, chemical, and physical quality, and this reduces the capacity of soil to support crop production and to provide other ecosystem services. So WLE has worked on building evidence on how and at what extent and in what conditions management practices improve soil health and then influence the delivery of several ecosystem services, like regulation of water flow, changes in soil biodiversity, or reduction of greenhouse gases. This is important because the primary focus in soil health management over the years has been in increasing crop productivity, but to a lesser extent in the associated environmental benefits. So given the momentum and the promotion of management practices to restore soil health is that WLE has built evidence on the environmental benefits of improving soil health as evidence to support the creation of investment cases for soil health restoration in Africa. My next message has to be with the science, the importance of science to inform action and investment. As restoration delivers multiple benefits and there is a diversity of management practices to restore soils and landscapes, there is then a critical need to start moving from general restoration investments toward investments that are more targeted, depending on the priority benefits. And those priority benefits change to one side to the other. So in this sense, science is needed to develop tools that help matching better restoration actions with the benefits of interest for the different stakeholders. So WLE advanced quite a lot on developing these tools and maps for targeting better restoration actions. So for example, we developed for Africa a map that shows us where is the highest potential to sequester carbon in agricultural lands if these are better managed and restored. Or in Ethiopia, we are finalizing the development of a tool that is called the Landscape Doctor Toolbox that help us to match different restoration options with different type of benefits, depending on what is the benefits that the stakeholders wants to maximize. For example, soil erosion, crop productivity, water flows, and so on. The other aspect that we also want to bring here is regarding monitoring landscape restoration. So what happened after investment? How we can improve our accountability in terms of delivering the expected impacts of restoration. So WLE has made an important contribution in developing and implementing monitoring frameworks to assess soils at large scales with a lot of efficiency and at a lower cost. So for that, ICRAF have been combining infrared spectral technologies with remote sensing. And right now, ICRAF has supported 31 labs in 19 countries across Africa in order to improve their capacity to monitor restoration options in the field. And then my two last comment has to be with policy. I think as scientists, we are learning more on how to engage better with policy processes to support the policy implementation. So one example is that we supported the land degradation neutrality target of the UNCCD through its science policy interface. Basically and specifically, we brought together CGIAR experience on assessing soil carbon sequestration to develop guidelines that can be applied in different contexts and that can also help level the field at the moment of reporting restoration actions and achievement across different countries. And to finalize, this interface between science and policies has to be in two ways. It's not only that science informs policy implementation, but also we need policy change to amplify the power of science. So here we brought this example in Ethiopia, where soil degradation and uncertain climate conditions are really threatening smallholders and poor farmers across the countries. This means that Ethiopia a society that is agricultural based, is struggling to produce food for a quickly growing population. So part of the solutions lies in determining the appropriate management of soil fertility for a given location. However, although this can be done rapidly through digital agriculture, agriculture is the less digitalized sector in the country and in other countries as well. And also soils and agronomy data that is in different organizations that has worked in the country for many years is not shared or not ready to be used for many. So with the support of the Ethiopian Ministry of Agriculture, we establish and we participate in a national task force to develop a soil and agronomy data sharing policy for Ethiopia. After many rounds of work in this task force, the policy was launched, and now we have a group of different organizations that are working on developing digital information systems to support more appropriate soil management and try to restore the soils in Ethiopia that are key for feeding their growing population. So with this, I would like to finalize this presentation. Thank you.
So good day to you. This presentation is on how management of river flow can be used as part of landscape restoration, in particular of floodplain landscapes. And it is first necessary to define what environmental flows or E-flows are. These are the river flows necessary to sustain aquatic ecosystems, which in turn support human cultures, economies, livelihoods, and well-being. It is clear from this definition that E-flows can contribute directly to the UN decade of ecosystem restoration, as they are a key measure of ecosystem condition. We make use of a model called PropFlow, which sets out to document and organize all of the evidence to estimate the E-flows. This can be quite complex. If we move from left to right in this figure, we evaluate the sources of stress in the basin, for example, agriculture, dam development, mines, etc., and document how they exert stress through changes in water quantity, quality, habitats, and how this impacts on a series of endpoints that include livelihoods such as farming, grazing, and building material collection, as well as protection of the ecosystem itself. The key thing in the assessment of E-flows is to establish the relationship between water flow and a variety of ecosystem components. This is first done by describing how the river flow changes the in-stream habitat. And in this example, the graph on the left shows the cross-section of a river and a range of water levels, each of which is flowing at a particular depth and velocity. All of these factors determine how the ecosystem will operate, which species can live where, and so on. In the case of a floodplain, we summarize the issues that a flood peak arriving on the floodplain will have for the fish population, for example. So going from left to right, we start in the dry months when most of the fish will be in deep pools, and then at the first sign of an increase in flow, the fish migrate onto the floodplain with ever rising water. The fish eggs on the floodplain hatch, and the small fish grow extremely fast before they return to the river as the floodplain shrinks. So we need to know all of this information. The evidence of this flow-fish relationship and all the others are combined into Bayesian networks, all integrated together, because at the end of the day, they are all influencing each other. And these are integrated so that the river flows that will provide the optimal combination of ecosystem protection and livelihood support are described as the E-flows. In the example of the Inner Niger Delta in Mali, North Africa, we have a floodplain of some 30,000 square kilometers that has a massive variable flooding regime that supports more than 1.5 million people and 4 million stock animals. The challenge with the E-flows on the Niger floodplain is to estimate how much water is required to flood onto the floodplain in different months of the year. So this hydrograph shows the flood peak arriving on the floodplain. A number of scenarios are plotted with the E-flow graph shown as the dotted orange line. If this flow is ensured on the floodplain, then it can be assured that the ecosystem will be optimally protected and that livelihoods will be supported. Thank you. I hope you found that useful. Just a demonstration of how e-flows can actually contribute to landscape management and sustainable development.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are participating in the current Global Landscape Forum event. My name is Brhanu Zamatim Brhanu. I am a senior scientist working in ICRISAT on land and water management. ICRISAT is a CGIAR center which contributes to the CGIAR agenda, which is ending hunger by 2030 through science to transform food, land, and water in a climate crisis. ICRISAT has a vision to have a prosperous, food secure, and resilient dryland tropics, and has a mission of reducing poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and environmental degradation in the dryland tropics. ICRISAT promotes smart foods, which are millet and sorghum, which are good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer. These crops have high iron content, have high zinc content, high in protein and antioxidants. Millet and sorghum can grow with minimal fertilizers and pesticides. Particularly, millet needs mean annual rainfall, which is less than 400 millimeters, and these crops survive in hot, dry conditions. The challenges of the semi-arid tropics are many. Degradation is the main one. When degradation is aggravated by extreme weather events and lack of improved technologies, the consequences are many. Poor crop management practices has consistently yielded less than 1 ton per hectare in many of the semi-arid tropics. The graph that you see in the bottom shows the yield of sorghum, which is less than 1 ton per hectare for the past 30 years in southern Mali. So the objective of our land and water management work in the semi-arid tropics is to provide solutions to improve crop productivity, erosion control, and socioeconomic benefits, and also promoting participatory watershed management practices to help to scale technologies in different agroecologies. The intervention practices are implemented at different scales, land at plot scale, farm field scale, and also landscape scale. These are examples of the different technologies like the hydraulic structures, the Zeiss, half moons, and FNR techniques, contour and stone bunds, and etc. We have community-driven restoration practices in different landscapes where we train farmers to delimit points of equal elevation across the landscapes, and seedlings are planted by farmers and also protected from the animal damage. And when these trees grow, they can be cut in dry season to feed animals. The impacts or the outcomes of this integrated land and water management practice are many, like we have high productivity gains and better economic benefits, improved health of the ecosystem and soil nutrient improvements, and evidence of data generation, which help to support regional and national decision-making policies. So the key message here are the technologies are practical and socially acceptable. Practices are tailored according to biophysical and socioeconomic conditions, and farmers are at the center point of implementing these practices. This helps to pave a way to scale technologies and practices widely. We have a readily available scaling strategies, and livelihood diversification and resilience building was happening through a number of combination of technologies, and we are working towards achieving the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration vision, which is preventing and halting, reversing the degradation of ecosystem services worldwide. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Dr. Tamana. I work with Alliance of Biodiversity in CIAT, based in Ethiopia at Sawa. I'll try to provide some highlights on our work related to landscape restoration in Ethiopia. The work has been implemented by WLE and different partners. So, Ethiopia is a big country of more than 110 million people, over 1.1 million square kilometer, and it is seriously affected by land degradation, whereby close to 50% of the highlands are degraded. And also the country has been impacted by serious degradation at the cost of more than 3 billion USD per year. However, restoration can reclaim this problem significantly, where evidence show a $1 investment can bring an investment or a return of about $4, which is a good thing because it highlights that the restoration can tackle some of the critical problems of land degradation. As a result, Ethiopia has invested a lot on land restoration, where over the last 50 years, and recently over $1.2 billion have been invested on restoration of the major four regions. There is also a huge investment and effort to contribute to FR100, where the country promised to restore 15 million hectares. And currently, there is an initiative by the Prime Minister, Green Legacy Initiative, which aims to plant 5 to 6 billion trees a year. And this year, also the planning process is taking place. So we will present two examples. One is the complementary or linkage technologies, the need to implement complementary technologies following the landscape continuum in order to generate multiple products or services from those interventions. Because in most cases, the experience is to implement one kind of intervention like afforestation or trees on some part of the landscape, while then there is a need to integrate different interventions across the landscape in order to get multiple benefits for multiple users. This is what we tried to do and what we have been doing. And our experience shows that this kind of intervention has more significant impact and even reduces conflict between upslope and downslope users. Another very important component that is mostly missed is evidence generation. In most cases, evidence are not generated adequately. When there is no baseline data, in most cases, even though there is a huge investment on land restoration. So we have in our learning watersheds tried to collect evidence as much as possible and also at a national scale. For example, in order to demonstrate how maintaining intact system, natural forest can benefit in sequestering carbon, and how degraded landscape can lose a huge amount of carbon, was demonstrated by work across the country from different regions. Large number of data is collected following land use on a sequence. So we can see the numbers where in the forest areas, there is a high amount of soil organic carbon, 144 tons per hectare, for example, while in open grazing areas, there is very small, around 31 tons per hectare. And we can see the changes. When we transition from forest to open grazing, there is a loss of more than 110 tons per hectare. And you can see other figures for other components. And when we do restoration from open grazing to afforestation, well-maintained forested system, there is a gain of around 90 tons per hectare of soil, soil carbon for the top soil. So this shows that while degradation can cause significant loss of soil carbon, restoration can still enable to bring in the carbon back to the system, important contribution. Then, the problem, or common problem observed in Ethiopia, for example, is impacts are analyzed considering only one parameter. It can be crop yield or biomass or soil erosion or water yield, but that can underestimate the real function of restoration, because we have to really analyze the different components, the different ecosystem services that can be acquired through restoration. So if you see on the left side is an area before restoration, the same area on the right side is after restoration. And you can see significant differences in different sub-functions of services, crop yield, canopy cover, biomass, and so on. This has been done for about 4 sites, and we're going to include other parameters such as pollination, biodiversity, and so on, so that we'll have as comprehensive evidence as possible for those restored areas. We also did a national analysis. There are huge interventions across the country, and we reviewed literature which analyzed the impacts of those interventions. Around 120 papers were reviewed, and meta-analysis conducted. And the result shows that biological options complemented with enclosures, conservation agriculture, really provide significantly higher yield, soil level carbon, and also play a significant role in reducing soil erosion compared to some of the interventions such as Panaju or terrace only. So this can provide an evidence on what we should plan where. The next one, very important parameter that should be considered is trade-off analysis. So in land restoration, we implement different practices across space, and the likelihood of trade-offs is higher, even though we try to implement complementary options. So we conducted trade-off analysis across at national level and at landscape levels. Also, on the left, you can see, for example, some of the interventions, how conservation agriculture provides significantly to productivity and lower in terms of runoff and so on. So the results are based on the review work. On the right side, you can see the spatial distribution. What is the trade-off in terms of yield and erosion reduction if we implement conservation agriculture across different parts. So this will be analyzed in detail further. This is a preliminary result that these are good indicators on how we need to also consider trade-offs so that we plan our interventions. Generally, our results and experiences in the country can have some implications over the decades for other restoration efforts. Some conclusions. Number one, I think we have to aspire creating multifunctional landscapes, but that should not be about ecosystems. It has to be about providing benefits for farmers in terms of resilience, productivity, food security, and so on. In addition, there is a need for systematic monitoring of efforts. There are huge investments being made, but not comprehensive analysis of impact is made. That's very critical to be conducted. And also there is even a lack of baseline data in some cases. It's also very important to assess the multiple impacts of those practices instead of single or two parameters or services. It will be very important to analyze the comprehensive impacts interventions so that we don't underestimate the value of restoration. The scaling up is critical and very important to sustain the restoration practices, but that needs a strong financial support and very robust governance system. So this should be in place to achieve the plan of restoration. And finally, our observation shows that some targeting and scaling tools may be necessary in terms of decision support because there are some gaps in implementing landscape restoration following the whole restoration pathway, like from identifying problems, diagnosis to implementation, impact assessment, and trade-off analysis. So a certain decision support tool may be useful to facilitate targeting and scaling. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Madeline Ilyas, and I'm the gender lead at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CGIAR. I'm delighted to be here with you today to share some of the research we've been doing on restoration, which forms the basis of a call to action. So to all restorationists representing governments, research organizations, environmental development organizations who are bringing the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration in with hope, with excitement, and who are contributing to ambitious restoration initiatives. And that call is that restoration is about trees, it's about soils, biodiversity, climate, ecosystems, but at its core, it's about people. So the people who manage these ecosystems, whose livelihoods are intimately tied with the landscapes being restored, and who stand to benefit or to lose the most from restoration. So the UN Decade underscores the links between restoration, local livelihoods, and achieving all of the sustainable development goals. But these links have to be intentionally pursued rather than assumed. And unfortunately, the research that we've done over the years shows that restoration initiatives, which range from international agendas to regional initiatives to national policies and programs, projects, research, mainly continue to overlook critical social, political, cultural issues related to restoration. So because the field of restoration is dominated by the natural sciences, and because we're looking for technical solutions that can be applied at scale, restoration approaches tend to be quite top-down, prescriptive, and ecologically focused. But we know that restoration is actually quite messy, that what works is context-specific, and that how people manage their lands depends on a range of socioeconomic, political issues, such as rights to land and to other resources, such as their ability to make a living off of that land and the resources it offers, such as assets and so much more. So we may have the best technologies, but local land managers may not have the incentives or the capacities to implement these. So to shed light on those issues and to learn from good practices and also from challenges in the field, we just published a special issue in the journal Ecological Restoration with 11 contributions from researchers and practitioners, NGO staff, government actors, community voices, working across disciplines to document and to think critically about what constitutes socially inclusive restoration. And I invite you to look at those contributions if you can. But as we did this, we also realized that there's a need for practical guidance that summarizes the findings of the paper. So we brought them together in a succinct synthesis article that offers 10 golden rules for socially sustainable restoration. And this article responds to a similar one that I'm posting here on DiSacco and colleagues that mostly focuses on biophysical aspects of restoration, though they do acknowledge the need to engage stakeholders and to secure economic returns to local people through restoration. So ours is a little bit of a complement to this article, and I'll take the rest of my time to go over our 10 golden rules for socially sustainable restoration. And we refer here to social sustainability to highlight our emphasis on the social aspects, which are often overlooked, as I mentioned, in restoration. But we recognize that the term is a little bit redundant since sustainability necessarily includes social dimensions. So the idea is not to imply that social issues are external to sustainability, but really to draw attention to them in the field of restoration here. So here are our rules. I won't have a chance to explain them all, but I hope you can look at the article when it's published and find some food for thought and guidance in it. So they cover all stages of a restoration project or program cycle. So the first one here is about recognizing diversity and interrelations among stakeholders, and recognizing also that these different stakeholders, these actors, and their interests and their capacities can evolve throughout a restoration process. So actors can be found at multiple levels, from multinational corporations to national policymakers, research institutes, and a very large diversity of rural women and men, farmers who make a living off of the lands or other ecosystems under restoration. So this rule is really about recognizing these different actors who have legitimate claims to have a voice and influence in restoration, to understand their motivations, their aspirations, their constraints and opportunities in restoration, and also the power relations among them, so how they relate to each other and to restoration initiatives. So doing this may require bringing in new social analysis skills in your restoration project teams in order to do this well. A second rule is around addressing socio-historical context. So we know that restoration initiatives are quite used to considering the ecological history of a landscape, but they often don't examine the human history of these landscapes and how economic and political processes at many scales have been driving degradation over time. So this rule is really about examining this history and possible resource-related tensions as well that may be a result of this history, to avoid triggering or accentuating conflict and jeopardizing the legitimacy of projects. I'll give more detail on 5, but I just want to mention the 2 in between: unpacking and strengthening local tenure for marginalized groups, and actively engaging communities as agents of change. So number 5 is about tackling equality across its multiple dimensions and scales. And this is really about thinking about which groups. I mentioned a range of different groups before, but landless farmers, rural women, which groups, which actors are recognized as legitimate actors in restoration, making sure, ensuring that they have a voice and that they have influence over restoration agendas, and considering whether they can reap the benefits and share the costs and the risks of restoration. It's also about recognizing equity across scales, so from within the household to the community level to relations between communities and the state, for example, and recognizing equity in the temporal sense, so also in terms of intergenerational equity, and also several other dimensions of equity. The other rules, there's one, as you can see here, about generating multiple benefits, including social benefits from restoration, promoting the equitable distribution of costs and benefits, mitigating risks, drawing on different types of evidence and knowledge, questioning dominant discourses, and practicing inclusive, holistic monitoring, learning, and evaluation. So all of these rules really highlight the need to bring a very interdisciplinary perspective and teams with different skill sets together to bridge the natural and the social sciences, and to collaborate among different groups of stakeholders to give us the best chance of generating initiatives that address the complex problems that restoration is meant to address. So I'll stop here, but I do hope that you can consult these rules to bring equity and inclusiveness considerations at the center of restoration practice. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this session where we want to discuss the importance of actively looking for synergistic solutions and minimizing trade-offs for long-term success in restoring African drylands. And we put success in quotation mark because success is relative to when, how, and by who is measured. And that's exactly what we want to spark. We want to spark discussions, ideas, and motivations for getting better, how to, on measuring success on multiple aspects beyond the economic, the environmental and ecological aspects. And one of the key characteristics of restoration is that for going downhill, we don't need active or collective action. But if we want to go upwards in the restoration pathway, so we do need collective action, participatory or active engagement of multiple stakeholders. And we also need landscape level planning for restoring the processes, services, and functions that restore agricultural ecosystems in drylands can provide. But yet this long-term process of going upwards is often challenged by the short-term or the short span of restoration projects. So then the question is how with these short-term projects we can better respond and better help landscapes going in the upwards pathway to move faster and better in achieving or restoring their ecosystem. And one of the key aspects is that we need to focus or look beyond the environmental and ecological performance. We know that restoration projects have multiple cascade in multiple direct and indirect benefits on different domains, and one, for example, is human well-being, and not only on these different petals, but also how the restoration project cascade at the plot and field, farm, household, landscape, national, and so on. So let me start with some ideas that we want to put forward on how to better capture, how to better account for the long-term success. And these reflection points are based on the collective work and research by CGIAR and non-CGIAR researchers. So then the first point that we want to put forward is put people and their well-being at the center when restoring African drylands. And this is grounded in the idea that well-being is often measured as material aspects. When we know that there are three universal domains, and relational and quality of life are very important as well, as we found in a novel study in Brazil, where we ask people how they perceive the work on integrative landscapes like fauna and resets affected their human well-being. And then we had also 2 other landscapes with a more sectoral entry point, like protected area and soybean. And what we found is totally opposite signatures. What we see is more positive impacts on quality of life, relational, material aspects, and then we see the opposite impact and more negative direct impacts on aspects like health or even economic aspects. So again, the restoration, the success aspect is different. And if we measure the success of the more sectoral landscape approaches with hectares, number of hectares protected, or with the yield attained, the story of success will be different. So again, how we can get better at capturing those direct or indirect effects on human well-being beyond material aspects. Also, we know that from surveying and discussing with practitioners, landscape practitioners, we know that achieving change at the landscape level, it requires investing a lot on coordination, planning, mediation, and training, building the capacity and bringing people together to move upwards. And this is this requires long-term investments. So then the question when thinking about restoring African drylands is how can we get better at investing, for example, multi-stakeholder platforms and measuring the impact of those investments. So the second point that we want to put forward is a reflection on rethinking agriculture in restored agricultural drylands. And we know that there's agriculture is beyond yield or calories, and there's more evidence showing the importance of diversifying not only for ecosystem services, but also for resilience and for stability. So is how we can identify interventions that support diversification, but also that measure better the comparative advantage of diversified systems, like, for example, by using the land equivalent ratio or other metrics that capture beyond yield. The third reflection point is that we want to assess, anticipate, and manage trade-offs. We need to bring together or marry the local knowledge and desires and visions and projections and use and mobilize models to see or foresee or anticipate the impacts of the selected interventions. One example is the bioeconomic model farm design, which was developed and actively improved to account for better metrics. And here, for example, in Kenya, we see that the solutions improve vitamin A, but it doesn't contribute to a household free budget. So it helps to see what are the other activities in tandem that needs to be put in place to have a better impact. Again, this is another model, stochastic impact evaluation framework that has been used in Ethiopia to guide the interventions that were collectively selected and identify not only what are the impact of those interventions in restoration, but also on the risk that they pose to farmers. And for example, they found out that sheep rearing is the riskiest option. So just to recap, put people under well-being at the center and support and strengthen governance, local capacity and leadership, and measure the impact of those investments. Again, for agriculture, the same, rethink agriculture diversification for restoration, ecological processes, resilient nutrition, but also measure the impact and the comparative advantage of different arrangements or different diversification strategies. And then finally, mobilize and use participatory action research with modeling approaches to foresee, anticipate, and manage those trade-offs and identify what are the other interventions that need to go in tandem to actually achieve healthy ecosystems and healthy people. And again, this is part of the process of the learning, always learning process when going upwards. With that, I would like to thank you so much for listening and looking forward for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, all the presenters. I think that was a kind of a transit walk of research in development that the CGIAR groups under the Waterland Ecosystem Program have been doing for nearly 10 years in the past. So this is a snapshot of what we have been doing so far. And then the whole idea of this session is really to look at some of these, and then I think to think a little bit also forward. Because oftentimes, from my own experience, oftentimes we would like look at how land degradation looks like in the past, and then we stand today, and then we would like to really fix yesterday's problem. Of course, it is also today's problem, and then it remains might also be a problem of tomorrow. So sometimes it is also look to have a trajectory. What would be the major drivers of ecosystem degradation also in the future? So there are so many unexpected things also coming. If you consider, for instance, the link between deforestation and then COVID theory. So there are so many things that we are really encountering. So I think also when you think of restoration and degradation, I think we need to be also a little bit also forward looking, and then we need to have the tools and methods and an approach to understand how the future also might look like, also because the demand of the society also keep changing. So I think it is really wonderful, and then I would like to really thank all the presenters, and then I hope the audience gets some insights, ideas about what we have been doing. And then if you need really further information, we have a booth exhibition. You can go and look some of the publications, some of the tools we have there. And then also feel free to type your questions, any request, and then if you put your email together with that, we would try to also get back to you if you will not be able to do it in this session, but we will try to also follow up with your request and then try to address those. So having said that, now is the time for the interesting session, which is a panel discussion. And then we have 3 panelists for this section. And then the basic questions that we raised in this discussion is, when you think of lessons for the UN Decade on ecosystem restoration, so the UN Decade has raised like 6 basic barriers, which they think would really, challenge for the successful restoration of degraded landscapes. And then in this session, I just picked 3 of them. But if you want to read, about all the 6 basic challenges, I also put in the chats. You can refer the UN Decade on ecosystem restoration on barriers to restoration thing. So I have 3 panelists, and I'm so honored to invite them. The first one is Hazel Nganda. She's from Uganda. And then she represents the youth, and then also, the women. And then she's going to tell us about one of the barriers of ecosystem restoration, which I will read it. There is limited awareness across societies globally of the considerable negative effects that ecosystem degradation is having on the well-being and the livelihood of billions of people. The cost of this degradation and the profound societal benefit that would occur with a major investment in ecosystem restoration. So this is one of the challenge, because very few people talk about the problem, but we are not sure that the broader society is really aware on the costs of ecosystem degradation. So that one, I think I would like to invite Hazel to address it. And then the second challenge, based on the UN Decade on ecosystem restoration, is limited technical knowledge and the capacity of national governments, at the local governments, local NGOs, and then private companies to design and implement large-scale restoration initiatives. And then that is, we would like to see, here the national perspective from our colleague Khalifa Traore, who has experience of research in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. So we would like to really see the perspective from the national side. And then the third question out of the 6 is also limited investment into long-term research, and then that would be very interesting also for us. And then including societal as well as natural sciences. That focuses on innovation to improve restoration protocols through time. So we would like to hear from my colleague Anthony Whitebread to tell us about what, and not about what, these are the what problems, but we would like to hear from these 3 panelists on how to address these potential barriers or challenges that the UN Decade on ecosystem restoration might face and then identify. So with that, I would like to also invite all the audience, whenever you have any questions, and then feel free to type it, and then I will try to bring up. And then also, if you have any question or any suggestion on the presentations presented before, you can also direct, to which person you are trying to address, and then you can also type on the text chat box so that I can also read and then ask the presenters to give you their answers. Yes, and then with that, I would like to invite, Hazel to answer the first question in, if possible, in 3 minutes. Hazel, the floor is yours, and then please welcome. And then you can also introduce yourself better. Where are you from? What do you do? If you want, 1 minute. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amias. Hi, everyone. My name is Hazel Najinda. I'm the founder of Climate Operation, and currently I'm based in Kampala, Uganda. So when it comes to how do we deal with lack of awareness about ecosystem degradation, well, the first thing we need to do is educate the masses about the advantages of ecosystem conservation and how that can actually tank the economy when our ecosystems are degraded. Then obviously we need to change the way in which we actually communicate about ecosystem degradation. Currently, there are a lot of scientific facts, and we're not really looking at the human impact that ecosystem degradation is having. So always changing the way in which we actually communicate to the communities about how to conserve the environment, or about how to deal with actually preserving or restoring a landscape will be a very good step. Then something else that I have done as climate operation is always engaging with grassroots organizations and climate environmental activists in communities, because these actors are actually in the community and they are very good when it comes to mobilizing the masses. So for example, if you want to go into a landscape and educate people about the advantages of conservation, how to restore a degraded landscape, it would be amazing if you collaborate with local actors, a grassroots activist or a grassroots NGO or an organization, because they are going to be able to mobilize these masses. Then if you're also going into a place where you don't speak the language, these people actually can help you in interpreting. So always collaborating with these internal actors is a very good step forward when it comes to creating awareness. Then my final recommendation would be to incentivize the project, because restoring a landscape is not cheap and communities are not going to be enthusiastic to actually join or learn more about restoration if they are not going to gain from it. So always incentivizing your project and ensuring that while you're actually restoring a landscape, there's an opportunity for the people that are involved in this restoration project, there's an opportunity for them to actually earn a living. This is going to create a sort of independence whereby even at the end of the project, the communities won't have to rely on the international actors. They'll actually be independent to continue on when the international actors have left. So those are my 2 recommendations: incentivizing the project and educating communities, and also ensuring that the education that we give these communities and the people is very accessible, because right now, most of the environmental conservation knowledge is online. But then we need to also acknowledge that very many people in the global south, like for example, in Africa, do not have access to the internet. So making these resources actually offline, whereby if you go to, let's say, a farmer in a rural district, they do not have access to internet, but they can actually access that information. So making it accessible as well is a good way in order to promote awareness about ecosystem conservation and the disadvantages to degradation on human lives. Thank you very much.
Yeah, many thanks for your key points. And then there was even before I go to the next panelist, I would like to ask you. There was one question coming yesterday, in fact, quite in advance before they hear us, and then they say that how do we really integrate or make use very active ecosystem restoration? An audience asked that one, and then if you have very specific answer for that, that would be really good, because that's a question which came even yesterday.
Yes, that is an amazing question. So currently, right now, when it comes to ecosystems and environmental conservation, it's very scientific. So as a young person, someone might think they will not be able to do it. And since right now in Africa, most young people are facing the problem of unemployment, the best way in which to engage a young person in such projects is to always incentivize the project, offer them trainings, because usually a young person will come into a project without the necessary information or knowledge on how, for example, to restore a degraded landscape. So always training them first, then as well as incentivizing it whereby they can actually make money from it is a very good way in which to involve them. And I think also this also links to women because, like, for example, in Uganda, majority of the small scale farmers in the country are women. And because of climate change and the destabilized weather patterns, most of their farms are actually not yielding as much. So also involving them in these projects, making sure that they're actually on the table to make decisions and they're not just going to sit back and watch you restoring, but they're going to be deeply involved in the project. You collaborate with them, with the young people as well. That would be a very good way in which to involve them in these types of projects when it comes to ecosystem conservation.
Yes, thank you very much. And then, some literature say that, investment in restoration, if you put $1, you'll get like $7 to $30 back. And then I think when you think of restoration, I think we need to make it also profitable. It should really create for, job for the youth. And then it should also attract the private sector so that, it should be a business, not like, something we are curing, but, we are really, tapping the opportunity of landscape restoration. And then thank you for that insight. So, I would really pass the mic to my second presenter, panelist, and then, kindly help us answering my friend Khalifa Traore. It would be nice if you answer on the capacity-related questions, and then the floor is yours, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Khalifa Traore. I'm the scientific director of CGIAR, which is the National Research System. So my first point will be directly on the capacity of the staff, the government staff we have on the ground, and which have as duty upscaling of restoration technology. They have weak capacities, so this is well known, and then they cannot, put a strategy in synergy, and then they cannot draft, a restoration plan for all the community or for all the village or for all the region. The only activity we are doing now is really small scale restoration program, and then we are assisted with the CGIAR Center. For instance, we work with Dr. Biranu on this issue. We work with ICRAF on this issue. We work with World Vision on this issue. And then we have proven technology, we have proven result. But the problem we have is how to upscale it widely. And then to upscale it, we need knowledge. And then there is a knowledge gap from the government side. First things. So that means in Africa, so we have to face this one first. And then I know this is a general problem in Burkina, in Mali, in Niger, it's the same. The second thing is the staff we have on the ground are very few. For instance, I'll give you an example. In Mali, for instance, in the Sinzana area, where I was coordinating several projects. So the commune have 72 villages and only 4 extension agents. Do you imagine 4 people for 72 villages? How can this gentleman go, through the village and then deliver message and then support farmers and then sensitize them and then train them and then show them what to do? Is really a challenge. So we have this gap to fill. And then another thing is related to the importance of capacity building we have in development plan of various communes. For instance, each of the communes have a development plan. And then in this development plan, so you have to specify technology, and then this technology to be implemented need to be reinforced by NGOs action. And then the NGOs, the staff of the NGOs also are not well trained on restoration technology, or even if they are well trained, so the activity are not oriented to restoration technologies. So this is a big concern. And also another concern for this issue is the benefit you can directly get from restoration. You cannot monetize directly restoration action, and then to be understood by everyone. So that means we have to simplify the key message for politicians. That means you have, for instance, to show them that with degraded land, so if you don't restore your land, the consequence will be illegal immigration. The consequence could be migration for job. The consequence can be criminality. The consequence can be theft. The consequence can be conflict amongst agriculture and livestock. So entering with these windows, I think that you can more convince them so that they can take into account this restoration issue in the various panel they're feeding in the upper level of the state. And one point I have to raise before I stop is, for instance, the cost of this restoration. The lady who talk right now talk about it. The restoration cost is high, and then the small project we have cannot, allow this restoration in a large scale. What we can do is to really on the government side have how to say it, a budget coming from the national budgets. They just have to pick up budget from the national treasuries, and then they have also to go through subsidies, and then they have also to go for partnership with international organization. They have to go for partnership with funding organization. They have to go with partnership with NGOs. They have to rely on philanthropic donors. They have to rely on private sector. So all these things have to be taken into account and work together in a kind of synergy so that we can access to the wide scaling we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you have touched very, very practical issues, not in a given country, but in particular in West African context. I think it is a case as the same in Africa, I would say. So I think a low level of investment and an attention to ecosystem health, and then it is consequence on peace, immigration, and all these kind of things. I think that is really great to hear from you. And then perhaps sometimes our entry point to convince our governments, donors, and then all stakeholders you mentioned is really by talking not only curing the land, but it's also curing the society, and then I think for well-being. So maybe the narrative has to be a little bit different, like the entry point presentation you saw, I think, bring, human-centered ecosystem restoration might be interesting. So very practical examples, and then I'm quite sure, I think this would be, so should be shared by many, African countries, I would say. So it's really wonderful. And then I was reading even a paper this week, which came, it's about $4 to $8 trillion is required to fix the damage we have made on our ecosystems. And where is this money coming from? And then, the priority and the attention given to ecosystem health, to me, compared to the problem it posed on, and then also the opportunity it has to bring in terms of job creation, well-being, and then also sustaining ecosystem services in general is so huge. And then I think we need to be, partnership is key, as you said, and then we need to really work hard to make, particularly taking the UN decade on ecosystem restoration to consider these kind of lessons. And then I think it is really, I'm happy with watching. Okay, I'll pass to my colleague Anthony in just going to tell us on the third challenge, to remind our audience, limited investment in terms of long-term research is one of the challenges, because evidence, as said, is very key in terms of all restoration work we are doing. Anthony, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amias, and a pleasure to be here. My name's Anthony Whitbread. I'm a research program director of a program called Innovation Systems in the Drylands, and I'm working with ICRISAT, which is one of the CGIAR centres that focuses on the semi-arid tropics. I've also been involved with WLE for several years, leading Flagship 2, which is all about the topic where we're talking about land and water systems for sustainable intensification, and it connects very well to this restoration agenda. So my topic is about long-term research investment, and we all know that it's in general dismally low in most of the developing world, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, which we're focusing on here, at both the country level by country level governments, but also at the regional or even international level. Most funding that is actually there is more likely to be directed at production, inputs, subsidies, regulation, but it's certainly most often not for the agenda of restoration. And in fact, the Maputo Declaration that happened in 2003 recommended that agricultural R&D would move towards 10% of GDP. And most countries don't have that possibility and are far less than even 0.1 or 2% of GDP going into agricultural type R&D. That said, there is a lot of research and development going on in this topic, but much of it is provided perhaps through external agencies, US and European and developed world universities, where many PhD students are undertaking studies in country, or it's being done through international collaborations, could be with the CGIAR in some cases. And increasingly remote sensing and other kind of remote satellite type work is used for monitoring. And again, the majority is not within Africa. And I think we need to change this, this narrative in some ways. There's also a very limited network of long-term trials and restoration type examples. The trials that are there, the long-term experiments that are there are more agronomic in nature, looking at production, or they may be studies in natural environments or protected areas. But there's very limited long-term monitoring of restoration in agricultural landscapes. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about where communities are farming landscapes for agricultural livelihoods. And we need to connect this nature-based solutions and restoration agenda into an agricultural landscape. Livelihoods are often not connected to the restoration agenda either. So the restoration needs to be supported also by the social side. And I think Marlene went into this very nicely. We need to consider these social dilemmas around managing common property resources, around equity, tenure. I think Stefan started by saying this. So a lot has been said about that already. The second part is, I think, the livelihood generation side has to be directly connected to what restoration is bringing us. And again, my colleague, Dr. Khalifa from Mali, is suggesting that it's just not about restoration, it's also about generating livelihoods from the restoration. And we also need to think about this broadly, about increasing agricultural production, about bringing in diversity into systems, and about agri-entrepreneurship that might result from a restored landscape. Often we require external interventions. As you heard from Dr. Khalifa again, we have 4 extension agents for 70 villages. So often we need external interventions to help governments to understand the importance of investing into this topic. Now the how, just in the last minute or so, well, there's 3 kind of areas I think we can increase the how. We need to continue training staff and students from sub-Saharan Africa, but I suggest more directly, funds could be used to support in-country research and development. And even after postdocs, post-PhDs, we can direct more of the research funding to supporting those newly graduated PhD students into re-entering their national R&D systems and have long-term support. I think the German system, DAAD, has some of these support, but I'd like to encourage other donors to consider such approaches to supporting PhD students who've just finished to get back into their R&D system, rather than just going back to a postdoc in Europe or the US or Australia. The second area is increasing funding for the integrative system sciences that recognize that the multidisciplinary nature of restoration agenda. And these require a longer term funding cycle than just 2 or 3 years. System sciences are long-term in nature, and they're also take long-term funding to start to produce the results that we see real restoration occurring. And the third area, I think it touches again on the last speaker, we need to bring the government investment. That's where it's the big money is at a country level. This means, I think one of the methods to do this is by creating long-term learning sites to demonstrate that this restoration of landscapes, integrated watershed approaches are influential and impactful. And then we can bring government ministers, donors, and attract this investment and policy change that we need. So those are the kind of three areas of how continue training students, but support them more directly in the in-country R&D. We need to increase the research funding going into integrative system sciences. And we need to demonstrate in pilots, in learning sites, how we can upscale these restoration agenda. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Anthony. I think you touched even the academic, the national research and the use. I think that's really wonderful. And then also when we think of funding source, I think the local governments also need to really put in place some resources for this to happen. Is really great. And then, yeah, I think long-term observation of not restoration per se. Also, we need to have also long-term research, which type of restoration works for whom and then under what condition. I think those kind of things would really help us also to have a kind of adaptive management, because at year one, you might think this kind of restoration program may work, but after 3 years or 4 years, things might change. Then I think giving a continuous feedback into the restoration programs using evidence in a long-term observation of restoration is really critical to me as well. So I think I thank all the panelists for giving very interesting highlights on how we are going to overcome at least 3 of the challenges or barriers to ecosystem restoration as identified by the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So I would like to ask the audience to put any question for any of the audience or any of the presenters that you have in the chat box. I don't see any so far. Then if you have any, do so. But in the meantime, I would like to also ask one question maybe to Dr. Lurseket. And there was a question which came yesterday. Is it really possible to restore an ecosystem? Because restoration means bringing back to its old state or undisturbed state. What is your take on that, Lurseket? In the meantime, please, if questions are coming, I'll be very happy. I'm checking on the text box. Lurseket, please.
Thanks, Ermias, and thanks for the question. I think there are definition of restoration, reclamation, and others can vary. But in general, the aim of restoration in this context is not to bring back the ecosystem to its original state or status. It will not be possible if you want to attempt, but the aim is to bring it back to a reasonable state where it can be more productive and useful for livelihood and livestock and others. So we are not referring to restoring to its original or native or pristine status. There are different stages, and our effort to restore it depends on the investment we make, the engagements, the duration, the length of time we put, how far we can take it to the original. Even though we may not reach there, it depends on the investment we can make. But in general, in restoration, in this circumstance, is not to bring to the original status, but to reverse to a situation where it is more productive, resilient, and useful. Thanks. I hope that answers the question. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't see any question coming. And then is there anything, any of the presenters, what if you have anything to say, even the panelists, and then I can also give you a second round of anything, anyone who had anything to say while I'm waiting for questions to come from our audience, not necessarily questions, but also, reflections on what you feel.
Okay. Hello?
Please, Dr. Khalifa, go ahead and then, yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about these restoration issues. In 2099, so in 2019, so World Vision, FAO, and ICRAF organized a conference in Bamako, and then it was really a great conference. It was involving, I think that more than 20 countries, and then it was about restoration. And then we have studies, on the ground funded by World Vision, and then we clearly showed that with farmer management of natural resources, so we can with the regenerated trees restore soil fertility, improve productivity, and even get the other ecosystemic advantage like decrease of temperature, so biological activities, and so on. And then we were able also to show that farmers who practice this farmer management of natural resources have more income than the farmer who are not dealing with the technology. So this is to emphasize on the fact that with restoration of soil, for instance, we restore everything at the same time. We restore biological activity, you improve chemical nutrient content of soil, you improve physical condition, you improve productivity. Tree as here, the ecosystem is bring back to the original, because original, the tree, the farmer cuts are restored, and then the ecosystem services are restored. So for me, you can restore it, but the cost and the time, it's not something you can perform in one season. It's something you have in the long term. This is why it is important to have long-term funding program or long-term funding strategy to be able to success with restoration. And then this restoration is mandatory for us. For instance, I will give you an example from Mali. From Mali, for example, we have this nationally determined contribution in the domain of climate change. In this document, Mali said that from 2022 to 23 to 30, so we have to reduce the greenhouse gases by 29. I said by 29 for agriculture, 31 for energy, and 21 for forest and land use. You see, without the restoration, this is not possible. Without the restoration, this is not possible for Mali. And the cost of this scenario is $34 billion, but it is a conditional funding, conditional cost. You see, so this restoration is a big issue, and then we cannot avoid it. If we don't put effort toward restoration, so we will have problem. I don't know for the other country, but for Mali, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Niger, so we are in the same. We have the same problem, and then we will suffer from the same problem. And then I observe it in all these countries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up this very practical experience, and then on what's happening on the ground. I think that is one. And there was one question which asked how do we really bring climate and then land initiatives together? Because for climate change mitigation and adaptation, for instance, we are doing a lot of climate smart agriculture, but at the same time it is also restoring degraded lands. I think this question is partly answered by Natalia when she said that we need to really leverage from synergies, because if you say climate change mitigation and adaptation, and if you ask what do, it is a nature-based solution. We need to do this and that. Then it also touches at the same time the land issue. And then also Lulsaget also mentioned that we shouldn't really measure our success or the outcome of restoration, because it could have multiple benefits, and then we need to have a holistic evaluation of investment on ecosystem restoration. Because when you restore land, you are also restoring biodiversity, you are also restoring climate, and then also other livelihood benefits you can mention, including giving shade for livestock in a dry climate by itself, increase livestock productivity. It's not at the feed, just by shade, by cooling the landscape itself. So I think there is a lot that could be really, synergized. And then just because of the sake of the time, I cannot really give any more an opportunity for others. But I would love to thank, GLA for giving us this opportunity. I would also thank all the panelists for taking your time and giving your thoughts. And then I also thank I would like to thank all the presenters and then the audience. And then with that, we will end our session, and then we hope we will work together on the coming UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and then hope to see you again in another event. Thank you very much, and then now the session is officially closed. Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Mordecai Ogada. I'm a Kenyan wildlife ecologist and a conservation policy expert, and a speaker at this year's GLF conference on restoration of Africa's drylands. This conference is very timely, of course, as we all know, and the restoration of Africa's drylands is a very crucial topic at this time. One of the things that we all have to keep an eye on is that restoration is a very powerful word. It implies what happens after some kind of disaster. But we have to ask ourselves, what are we restoring it from, and what are we restoring it to? Africa's drylands are crucial for biodiversity, human livelihoods, ecosystem services, etc., etc. And most of all, and most importantly, we must inform the global audience and keep them informed of the fact that Africa's drylands are also home to millions of African people. The fact that they're this important for biodiversity implies an equilibrium that has existed there for tens of thousands of years at least in several parts of Africa. So this must have been something going right. And I think restoration has to look closely at strengthening and restoring that wherever it has been lost. However, a lot of conservation practitioners see restoration in the light of fortress conservation, as in the removal of existing humans and human livelihoods from areas for the sake of biodiversity. This is a fallacy and something that grew out of the creation of national parks in the United States in the 19th century, which cannot be applied all over the world and cannot be applied in this time and place where we exist today. We have to look carefully at decisions like the recommendations on having 30% of the world under protected areas. We have to ask where people live, and you imply protection. What is that protection from? In many parts of Africa, this manifests on the ground as protection of areas from its residents or its custodians or its owners. And this necessitates violence, necessitates displacement, and all sorts of violations of human rights that are unacceptable in the world as we know it today. So conservation must take into account all these things and must be practiced at much higher resolution. We must remove from conservation the primitive notion that something that worked in the United States can work in Africa, and something that works in Africa can be applied in Asia, etc., etc., etc. We as experts and practitioners have to take our place at the table, and we have to be honest with governments, with international organizations, with donors, and all the people involved to make sure that what we are putting in place is not only environmentally sustainable, but politically, humanly, and socially sustainable, so that we maintain equilibrium, because equilibrium is what lasts for millennia. Fortresses only last for very short periods of time. So I look forward to discussing these things further, and I look forward to a decade that will show the way and show a departure from what we've been doing in the past that has required so much violence, that has required so much in terms of financial input, and that has created crises in many parts of our world. But we need to do this for the good of everybody. The protection of biodiversity is not for its own sake. It's never for its own sake. It's for the good of everybody. And I look forward to talking to all the participants more about this. Thank you.